Welcome to the FOCIS podcast, brought to you by the FOCIS Communications Committee.
Well, hello, Dr. Abbas. Thank you so much for being here today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what your role is with FOCIS?
My name is Abul Abbas. I've actually been involved with FOCIS from the time the organization was founded. At that time and proceeding from then on, my principal role has been in the educational programs of FOCIS. I chaired the education committee for many years, and I started the basic immunology in medicine course as well as the advanced course in basic and translational immunology. I also served about 10 years ago. I served as the president of FOCIS for a couple of years, and I'm a regular attendee at FOCIS meetings as well as FOCIS courses worldwide.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. To start off, what would you say attracted you to the field of immunology?
Well, I went to medical school in India and then came to the Brigham to do my residency in pathology. And even though I have an MD, I was always more interested in science. It's an interesting story here. The Brigham was the first hospital in the world to do a kidney transplant. And so as residents in pathology, we were constantly being asked to look at slides of kidney biopsies to diagnose rejection. And if any of you has looked at a slide of a rejecting kidney, you'll see an immune response in action in real life. So this was really fascinating. What are these cells doing? What's the immune response? Why is the kidney being rejected? And that's what got me into immunology. So I finished a rather short residency and then switched into research, both in Boston, a little bit in London. And then when I was recruited back to the Brigham, I set up my own research lab. I had very little clinical responsibilities.
All right. Well, that sounds great. So then what have you done so far in your line of work, and what can we expect in the future?
Yeah, my lab is has been very much a basic immunology lab. We've been interested in cell interactions in the immune system. How do lymphocytes talk to one another? How do B cells and T cells communicate? What are regulatory T cells? How do they work? So this has all been really basic immunology. I was actually fortunate because I got into the field in the late 70s, at the time when many of the principles of basic immunology were being established. So it was a very exciting time to be a student of immunology. And that's what I've done my entire career. Over the years, I've gotten increasingly involved in education. I ran the immunology course at Harvard, and then subsequently, when I moved to UCSF in San Francisco, I was heavily involved in the immunology course. And so in some ways, my career is unusual. For me, education has been just as important a part of my life as laboratory research. Over the years, I also got involved in writing textbooks in immunology and pathology. So now I retired about 5 years ago and closed my research lab a couple of years before that. And now I really focus on working on textbooks and teaching courses both in the US and worldwide.
Well, that is very fascinating. And thank you so much for being here with us today. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Larissa.
And now we will hear from Dr. Bana Jabri, who was a FOCIS keynote speaker at the 2024 annual meeting.
Well, hello, Dr. Jabri. Thank you so much for being here today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
First, it's a pleasure to be here at the FOCIS meeting. So I'm a physician scientist by training. I'm currently a professor at the University of Chicago, and I will be directing the Imaging Institute in Paris starting January 2025, while keeping a visiting professor position at the University of Chicago.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much for being here. So what attracted you to the field of immunology?
So as I said, I'm a physician scientist. So I would say since I was little, I knew I wanted to become a doctor, but I was very attracted by science. And when I started medicine, it became extremely clear that there were so many unanswered questions and so many things one could change for the care of patients. And this really came to the forefront when I took my first residency. In France, you have 6 months where you spend 6 months in the same place. And it turned out that during those 6 months, I was taking care of children who had very severe villus atrophy, who were on total parental nutrition. Many of them died under my watch, having very heavy immunosuppressive treatments, but we didn't know to whom to give the immunosuppressive treatments, to whom not to give it. And there was a talk from a basic scientist in mucosal immunology, Delphine Guicron, and she showed a slide where she showed that T-cell activation in the gut could lead to destruction of the tissue. And that really gave me the idea of just asking the question using histological slides of those children with intestinal disorders, is there immune activation or not? And I was lucky enough, even though I was just a young resident, to meet Claude Grisely, who was at Necker, and he introduced me to a group of scientists there. And in collaboration with Nadine Serpin-Susson, we did a classification of the intractable diarrheas, and that actually changed the way the children were taken care of, because we could separate them in those who really needed the immunosuppressive treatment from those who should undergo intestinal transplantation. And so I really saw the power of science in medicine. And that led me then, to go on do a postdoc in the United States and to really have research part of my career.
Oh, well, that's very exciting. So then what would you say is next for you in the future of your career?
So I love science, and so I want certainly to continue to do research. I think there are a lot of interesting questions, and we can get to that afterwards. But I also came to a point in my life where I realized that one of the challenges today is how should we combine basic science of a high level with medicine and translational research. And I was given the chance of heading the Imagine Institute in Paris, which is an institute that does genetics development and immunology, and also looks at diseases that go from the brain to the heart, the kidney, the gut, and the bone. And to taking the direction of that institute, I think, gives me the opportunity to really think about what should be the infrastructure, what type of interaction should one establish, what type of technologies should one implement in order to really favor this transition from basic research to the patient. And so for me, it's exciting to, envision that, which is very close to my own research, where I do both basic science, but also translational research, mouse work and human work. But to think about it at a much larger and global level is exciting to me. And I think it's an important question for the future.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And then to wrap up our interview, what would you say is new on the horizon for the field of immunology?
So I think that, people, each time we make major discoveries, we think that in some ways there are no other major discoveries to be made. And it is true that, in immunology, once we discovered somatic, how one could do VDJ recombination, introduce diversity for the TCR and the BCR repertoire, discover the T-cell receptor, et cetera, the MHC, the first crystal structure. You could have said, that's it. We now know about everything in immunology, but it stays that we still don't know how to treat cancer. We don't know how to treat autoimmune disorders, which means that there are still a lot of remaining questions to which we don't have an answer. And if you think about the field of science, there was a time where physiology was at the forefront. with Mechnikov and others, Pasteur. And then came a point where molecular biology was introduced, and we became extremely specific and molecular in our understanding. But today, with all these new omics approaches, with all the revolution in artificial intelligence and in, I would say, in the way of analyzing data, what people call also systems biology, we are now going back into thinking in a much more global manner. We know that if you have a gut disease, the brain is involved. We know that if you have a gut disease, you can have an impact on the liver, you can have an impact on other organs. And so we are going back to this notion that we should be thinking in a much more comprehensive and integrated manner and in a physiological manner. So I believe the really next challenge for us in immunology is how are we going to integrate this big data and this omics data, but to create meaningful hypotheses and to know how to test them and to go from big data to meaningful hypotheses and meaningful models that then can be tested. So to me, this is the big next challenge for all of us.
That sounds very exciting. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to interview with me today.
Thank you very much.